Today in Luke's gospel, he's continuing to teach us about prayer. And when we stop and think about prayer, Ignatius says, is an I-thou thing. It's a conversation. And if we're speaking in a conversation, it's helpful for us to know the language, right? If you don't know the language, it can be difficult. And as I was reflecting on this, it reminded me of when I was in school, where I went to seminary. On your 5th year of studies, they would send you to Israel. And there was an upperclassman who I really looked up to. And when he was in his 5th year, they thought it was too unsafe to send people to the Holy Land, so they instead sent them on a European pilgrimage. And as he was relating to me a story from his pilgrimage, he said that towards the end of their pilgrimage, they entered into Spain, and they were waking up really early one morning. They went to this restaurant for breakfast. And he said it was the type of table where you kind of, it's a big U and only 2 people on the end. And he said they all filed into the table, and they sat down getting ready to prepare for their breakfast, and they noticed that they didn't have 3 napkins that they needed. And so they looked down to the guys at the end of the table, and they said, do you think you could ask the server for some napkins? Tell him that we need 3 napkins. And the guys at the end of the table said, yeah. And then they started thinking, they're like, well, maybe some of us who are a little bit more skilled in language should go and speak to the waiter. And they said, would you like us to do it? And they're like, no, we can get some napkins. That's not too hard. And so when the waiter came, they told him, we're short 3 napkins. Can you bring us 3 napkins? And so the waiter left. He said, yeah. And he disappeared. And time goes by, they're talking, and everyone's like, what's going on? And so they looked down and they said, did you ask him for napkins? And they said, yeah. He said he'd bring them, not to worry. And even more time went by, and eventually the waiter comes back, and on his tray, instead of 3 napkins, there's 3 beers. And the reason for this is, if you know the language, in Spanish, the word for napkin is servilleta, and the word for beer is cerveza. Very similar. And so if you get the nuance of the language wrong, it changes what you're asking for. And what we see in the readings today is the language being confused. Here we have this Pharisee who would be someone everyone would look to as a model for what holiness is. As you hear him when he's speaking to himself, I don't know if you caught that, he has this prayer to himself, right? He's telling himself how great he is. I tithe, I fast, I do all these things. And then he's like, and thank goodness I'm not like any of those sinners out there, especially that tax collector in the back. Because the tax collector was a public sinner. But Jesus says that this tax collector is just bent over, beating on his breast and asking the Lord to have mercy on him, a sinner. And you see that there's this prayer of pride versus this prayer of humility. But the language of God is the language of humility. Even when we look to the Christological hymn in Paul's writings, it says, even though he was in the form of God, he emptied himself, he humbled himself, and took on the form of a slave, being born in the likeness of human flesh. So we hear that Jesus himself, he identifies with the one who has come in a humble way to show us the path, to show us how we are to come before the Father, and to recognize our need for his grace. And that's what the one who's the tax collector, he recognizes that he needs God's grace. He recognized that he's poor. And all these readings today speak about how God hears the cry of the poor. He hears the cry of the lowly. He hears the cry of those who are humble. And we see this. And I remember years ago when I was newly ordained, after this reading about how God hears the cry of the poor came up, Someone came up to me after Mass, and they were a little bit excited. And they said, "What about me, Father? Doesn't God hear the wealthy? Is it just the poor?" And I said, "Well, we all have a poverty, right? All of us have a poverty, but we need to tap into that poverty, right? I mean, there's material wealth, but there's also spiritual poverty. Of when we're asked to do something that we're not sure we can do, but God is inviting us to it, that we cry out to God in that moment for the grace that we need. Or maybe it's when we recognize that, hey, I'm not perfect, I'm a sinner, I need God's grace, like the tax collector in today's gospel. I remember when Mother Teresa brought her Sisters of Charity to the United States, she got some flack for that. They asked her, "Why would you bring your sisters to a first world country?" And she said, "Well, there's a greater poverty here. There's a poverty of loneliness. My sisters are caring for people that are shut up in their apartments and no one even knows they exist. People walk by with heavy burdens and no one even knows that people are carrying these burdens because they're all on their own." She says, "There's a deep poverty here." And so we all at some level have a poverty. And the Lord invites us to enter into that poverty and to pray out of that poverty, to recognize our need for His grace, for His love, and His mercy. And if we do pray out of that, then it opens us up to receive, as Jesus says, the latter went home justified. Because the one who knows and comes out of this place of humility, God will shower with His grace. And that no matter what we've done, there's nothing we could have done that He can't reach down to us and give us what we need. And so as we come to this altar today, I just invite you to think about, what is that poverty in your life? Where is that place that you need His grace, that you need His healing, that you need His strength? And to cry out to the Lord for that as you come to receive Him in this Eucharist. There's this wonderful prayer in the church. A lot of the Eastern fathers would use it, and it's called the Jesus Prayer. And they would sometimes pray it like 10,000 times a day. But it's a beautiful prayer. It says, "Lord Jesus Christ, Son of the living God, have mercy on me, a sinner." It's a short prayer, but it's a beautiful prayer. And in this prayer, we recognize that Jesus is God and I'm not. And then we also recognize, in relation to God, that we're a sinner and we need His grace. We need His mercy. And so whenever we're going through life and we start to get worked up, I remember in the seminary, there was a professor who taught us, learn this prayer, pray it. Maybe not as often as the Eastern Fathers, but pray it. Pray it regularly. And that way when things come up or things happen, or maybe you start to get puffed up about something, to recall, Lord Jesus Christ, Son of the living God, have mercy on me, a sinner. And if we do that, it'll put us in that proper place, and we will speak with the language of God, that language of humility, and He will meet us in that place, and He will strengthen us.